My stepmother's text glowed on my screen. Grandpa's funeral is for immediate family only. Do not come. She thinks she has finally erased me, just like she tried to 10 years ago in that cold basement. But as I look out at the city, I just smile. She has no idea that the man she is burying left his entire empire to the girl she beat into silence. My name is Ariana Cantu. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling glass of my apartment on the 51st floor, watching the wind whip the snow into frenzied spirals above the Chicago River. The city below was a grid of amber and steel, shivering under the grip of a mid-January freeze that made the bones ache just looking at it. It was beautiful in a detached, clinical way, much like the life I had built for myself here. Quiet, controlled, safe. My phone vibrated against the marble surface of the kitchen island. The screen lit up, cutting through the dim blue light of the room. It was a single text message. The name displayed at the top was Vanessa. I did not have her saved as mom, nor stepmom, nor anything remotely familial. Just Vanessa. I picked up the device, my fingers brushing against the cold metal casing. The message was brief, brutal, and entirely expected. Grandpa's funeral is for immediate family only. We are keeping it private for those living at the main house. Do not come. We will send you the address for flowers if you wish. I stared at the words. Most daughters would feel a sting of tears or a hollow ache in their chest at being legally and emotionally excised from their grandfather's final farewell. Most daughters would call their father, begging for an explanation, pleading to be allowed to say goodbye to the patriarch of the family. I did neither. Instead, a slow, thin smile touched my lips. It was not a smile of joy, nor was it one of amusement. It was the expression of a chess player who watches their opponent make a move they had anticipated 10 moves ago. Vanessa thought she was guarding the gate. She thought she was protecting the fortress of the Everett dynasty from the unwanted, stained presence of Mark Everett's first daughter. She believed that by keeping me in Chicago, she was securing the narrative she had spun for nearly 2 decades, that I was the ungrateful, unstable runaway who had abandoned the family, while she and her daughter, Sienna, were the devoted caretakers. She had no idea. I set the phone down and turned back to the window. My reflection ghosted over the city lights. Pale skin, dark eyes that had learned to hide everything, and the sharp jawline I inherited from a mother I barely remembered. I kept my mother's last name, Cantu. It was the one thing my father allowed me to keep when he remarried, perhaps because it made it easier to explain why I didn't fit in with the Everett perfection. To the outside world, I was Ariana Cantu, a nobody from Ohio. But to Henry Everett, the man lying in a casket in Maple Ridge right now, I was everything. Vanessa and my father, Mark, were operating under the assumption that the succession plan was a straight line. They believed that when Henry died, the control of Everett Logistics Group, a shipping and supply chain empire worth $4 billion, would pass directly to his only son. Mark, they believed the sprawling estate, the horses, the accounts, and the power were already theirs. They thought I was merely a nuisance to be managed via text message. They did not know about the meetings I had attended in secret. They did not know about the encrypted emails or the long drives I made to a private clinic in Columbus where Grandpa Henry spent his final, lucid months. They certainly did not know about the trust. The memory of why I left and why I stayed away hit me then. It wasn't the cold of Chicago that made me shiver. It was the phantom sensation of damp concrete and the smell of moldering cardboard. Maple Ridge, Ohio. 10 years ago. I was 20 years old then. I was not a child. I was a sophomore in college. Home for the holidays. Trying desperately to find a way to exist in a house that had no room for me. The Christmas party had been in full swing upstairs. I could hear the muffled sounds of Bing Crosby singing about white Christmases, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the high-pitched, performative laughter of Sienna charming the local elite. I had retreated to the basement. It was the only place in the estate where I felt I could breathe. I was sitting on an old crate, reading a book, trying to make myself invisible until the guests left. Then the door at the top of the stairs opened. The light from the hallway sliced into the darkness, silhouetting Vanessa's perfect, expensive frame. She didn't come down to bring me a plate of food. She didn't come down to ask me to join the party. She came down because she had seen me talking to Grandpa earlier that day. She had seen him hand me a file, and her paranoia, always simmering, had boiled over. I remembered the sound of her heels clicking on the wooden steps. Click, 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 like a countdown. She didn't scream. Vanessa never screamed where people could hear her. She spoke in a hiss, a venomous whisper that echoed off the stone walls. She accused me of poisoning Henry's mind. She accused me of trying to steal Sienna's future. When I tried to stand up, to walk past her and leave, she shoved me. I was 20 years old, but in that house, I reverted to being a frightened 10-year-old. I stumbled back. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my flesh, and threw me against the metal shelving unit. The pain was sharp and immediate as the steel edge caught my shoulder. Then came the slap, hard, ringing, humiliating, and finally, the shove that sent me to the cold concrete floor. "Stay down," she had whispered, towering over me while silent night played on the floorboards above us. "You are nothing here. You are broken, and if you tell your father, I will make sure he sends you to a facility where broken girls go." I had stayed down. I had swallowed the blood from my cut lip. I had let the silence consume me. But that was a decade ago. The Ariana who lay on that basement floor was gone. She had died in that damp dark, and something else had crawled out in her place. My computer chimed, pulling me back to the present. I walked over to my desk. A slab of black glass that seemed to float in the center of the room. A secure email had arrived. Sender, Evelyn Marsh, Esquire. Subject, Everett Family Gathering and Codicil Reading. Mandatory attendance. I opened it. The language was formal, precise, and lethal. It outlined the schedule for the weekend. The funeral on Saturday morning, the interment at noon, and then, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a mandatory reading of the final addendum to the last will and testament of Henry Everett at the estate library. I scrolled down to the logistics section. My eyes landed on the paragraph that would soon shatter my father's world. Per the instructions of the deceased, the reading will not be presided over by Mr. Mark Everett. The executor has designated the presiding officer for all estate matters and the sole authorized representative of the Everett Family Trust to be Ms. Ariana Cantu. Attendance is mandatory for all potential beneficiaries. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the leather creaking softly. The irony was rich enough to choke on. To my relatives, to the gossips of Maple Ridge, and especially to Vanessa. I was the failure. I was the girl who couldn't hack it, who dropped out of the family picture to live a lonely, struggling life in the city. They imagined me working some low-wage job, perhaps as a waitress or a clerk, barely scraping by, bitter and envious of their wealth. They didn't look closely at the tech world. If they did, they might have noticed a company called Glassline Systems. I built Glassline from the ground up, starting with nothing but a laptop and a burning obsession with surveillance. We designed high-end, unhackable security systems for smart buildings. My code ran the veins of hospitals, banks, and data centers across the Midwest. My philosophy was simple. Nothing stays hidden. Every shadow can be illuminated. Every whisper can be recorded. The company was valued at $80 million last quarter. I didn't need Henry Everett's money. I didn't need the allowance my father had cut off 5 years ago. I had built my own empire, one rooted in the very thing Vanessa feared most, the truth. I tabbed over to a new window and logged into the airline portal. I didn't search for economy seats. I didn't look for the cheapest layover. I typed in the destination, Columbus International, the closest major airport to Maple Ridge. I selected a first-class seat for tomorrow morning. One way. When the payment screen appeared, I didn't use my personal American Express. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a heavy black card that had arrived via courier 3 days ago. It bore the crest of the Everett Family Trust. My name was embossed on the front, right next to the word trustee. Entering the card numbers felt like turning a key in a lock that had been rusted shut for years. 4-2-6-6. Transaction approved. Vanessa wanted me to stay away because she thought I was coming to beg. She thought I would show up in a cheap coat, crying, asking for a payout or a seat at the children's table. She thought she could block me with a text message because she still saw me as the victim she left on the basement floor. She was bringing a knife to a nuclear war. I stood up and walked to my closet to pack. I would not bring colorful clothes. I pulled out a structured black coat made of cashmere, tailored sharp enough to cut. I chose boots with a heel that clicked decisively against the floor, a sound I wanted them to hear coming before they saw me. I wasn't going home to grieve. I had already grieved for my grandfather in the quiet moments we shared in the hospital, holding his frail hand while he whispered apologies for not protecting me sooner. I wasn't going home to reconnect. There was no connection left to salvage with a father who chose blindness over his own daughter. I was going home to finish the story that started 10 years ago. I zipped up my leather weekend bag and looked at the Chicago skyline one last time. The snow was falling harder now, blurring the edges of the world. It would be snowing in Ohio, too. The roads would be icy. The estate would be white and pristine, hiding all the rot underneath. "You told me not to come, Vanessa," I said aloud to the empty, silent apartment. My voice was steady, lacking any tremor of fear. But the thing about property owners is that they don't need an invitation to inspect their own house. I thought about the basement. I thought about the way the shadows stretched across the floor. And I thought about the one thing Vanessa didn't know, the one thing even my father didn't know. I wasn't the only one who remembered that night. There was someone else, a pair of eyes in the driveway, a recording that had been kept safe, waiting for the statute of limitations on family loyalty to run out. I grabbed my phone and swiped Vanessa's message into the trash without replying. I didn't need to send a text. I would deliver my message in person, at the head of the table, with the full weight of the law and a decade of receipts behind me. I was going back to Maple Ridge, and I was going to open the basement door wide enough for the whole world to see what lived in the dark. The flight to Columbus was smooth, a seamless glide over a blanket of white that stretched from Illinois across Indiana and into the heart of Ohio. I spent the hour staring out the porthole, but I was not seeing the clouds. I was seeing a small wooden house set back from the main road, dwarfed by the massive iron gates of the Everett estate. I was seeing the ghost of a girl who used to live there. To understand why I'm going back to destroy the peace of my family, you have to understand the silence that built me. My childhood in Maple Ridge did not begin with Vanessa. It began with an empty chair. My mother, a woman named Elena Cantu, died when I was barely old enough to memorize the sound of her laugh. She left behind a silence in our home that was heavy and thick, like a wool blanket soaked in rain. My father, Mark, did not know what to do with that silence. He was a man of logistics, of schedules and shipping lanes and efficiency. Grief was not efficient. He tried to raise me the best way he knew how, which was by ensuring I was fed, clothed, and sent to school on time. But emotionally, he was a ship adrift without an anchor. We lived in the guest cottage then, a beautiful but modest cedar structure on the edge of the sprawling Everett land. We were close enough to see the lights of the main house where Grandpa Henry lived, but far enough away to feel like an afterthought. Then came Vanessa. I was 10 years old the first time I met her. She did not look like anyone else in Maple Ridge. The women in our town wore practical denim and sensible boots. Vanessa wore cashmere that looked like it would dissolve if it touched a snowflake. She smelled of expensive vanilla and ambition. She had moved from the city, bringing with her a dazzling energy that seemed to wake my father up from his long gray sleep. When she first sat at our dinner table, she did not ignore me. In fact, she focused on me with a laser-like intensity that felt almost like love. She brushed the hair out of my eyes. She asked me about my grades. She told my father that he had done a wonderful job raising such a serious little lady. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. The neighbors, the aunts, even Grandpa Henry initially thought that Mark had finally found someone to make us a whole family again. But Vanessa did not come alone. She brought Sienna. Sienna was exactly my age, born just 3 weeks after me, But she seemed to belong to a different species, where I was dark-haired, quiet, and watchful. Sienna was blonde, bubbly, and demanded the oxygen in every room she entered. She was a performer by nature. She could sing, she could dance, and she could charm a room full of adults before she even took off her coat. The erasure of Ariana Cantu did not happen overnight. It was not a violent event. It was a slow, methodical erosion, like water dripping on a stone until the stone simply ceases to be there. It started with the small things. I remember my 11th birthday. My father had promised to take me hiking up near the ridge. Just the two of us. I had packed my bag the night before, excited to have him to myself, but at breakfast, Vanessa placed a hand on his forearm, a light, delicate touch, and said in her honeyed voice that Sienna had a dance recital that afternoon and was terrified of going without a father figure in the audience since her own dad was out of the picture. Ariana understands. Don't you, sweetie? Vanessa had said, turning her bright eyes toward me. You are so independent. You don't need your hand held like poor Sienna does. She is just so fragile. And there it was, the trap. If I argued, I was being selfish. If I cried, I was proving I wasn't the strong, independent girl they praised. So I nodded. I swallowed the lump in my throat and said it was fine. My father looked relieved. He kissed the top of my head and left with them. I spent my birthday sitting on the porch steps, watching the dust motes dance in the sunlight, learning the first lesson of my new life. Needs are for other people. Over the next few years, this became the script. Vanessa was a master of the backhanded compliment. She would tell guests that Sienna was so spirited and full of life, and then lower her voice to add that Ariana was very intense and solitary. She painted a picture of me as a brooding, difficult child who preferred to be left alone. The truth was, I was desperate for connection, but every time I tried to step into the light, Vanessa would gently steer Mark's attention away. Look at Ariana reading her book again, she would say during family movie nights, even if I was just sitting there waiting for someone to make room for me on the sofa. She is such an intellectual. We shouldn't bother her with our silly noise. And my father, gradually and without malice, began to believe her. He stopped asking me to join them for ice cream because he assumed I would say no. He stopped checking my homework because Vanessa assured him I was too smart to need help. He retreated into his work, running the eastern branch of Everett Logistics, leaving the emotional management of the house entirely to his wife. I became a ghost in my own home. To survive, I found a sanctuary. The main house, where Grandpa Henry lived, was a massive Victorian structure with creaky floors and too many rooms, but underneath it all was the basement. It was not a finished, carpeted recreation room like the ones my friends had. It was a workspace. It smelled of dry paper, cedar wood, and old furnace oil. This was where the history of Everett Logistics lived. While Sienna was upstairs in the living room practicing her pirouettes for an audience of clapping relatives, I would slip down the narrow wooden stairs. The air down there was always 10 degrees cooler, a crisp chill that cleared my head. The walls were lined with metal shelves stacked with boxes. Inside were manifests from 30 years ago, route maps from the 1970s, and maintenance logs for trucks that had long since been scrapped. In the center of the room was a large drafting table where Grandpa kept his master maps. I loved that room. I loved it because it made sense. Upstairs, the rules were constantly changing. Upstairs, a smile from Vanessa could mean affection, or it could mean a trap. Upstairs, my father's love was a variable I could not calculate, but down here, in the basement, the world was logical. A truck left point A at 8 in the morning. It traveled 60 miles per hour. It arrived at point B at a specific time. If it was late, there was a reason: a flat tire, a storm, a traffic jam. There was always a cause and an effect. I spent hundreds of hours down there between the ages of 12 and 15. I organized the old files not because anyone asked me to, but because putting things in order calmed the chaos in my chest. I studied the maps of Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Illinois until I could trace the interstate highways with my eyes closed. I thought I was alone, but I wasn't. One afternoon, when I was 13, the heavy door at the top of the stairs creaked open. I froze, expecting Vanessa to come down and scold me for hiding, to tell me that my antisocial behavior was embarrassing the family. Instead, heavy boots descended the stairs. It was Grandpa Henry. He didn't say anything at first. He walked over to the drafting table where I had spread out a series of fuel consumption charts I had found in a box from 1999. I had been trying to calculate how much money the company could have saved if they had switched to a different tire brand back then. Grandpa leaned over, his silver hair catching the light of the single bulb hanging above us. He looked at the papers. Then he looked at me. "You found an error in the quarterly estimate," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I whispered, terrified I was in trouble for touching his things. The fuel surcharge was calculated at 2%, but the average for that winter was 3.5. Grandpa Henry pulled up a stool and sat next to me. He didn't smile, but his eyes, usually hard and distant, were warm. "Show me," he said. That afternoon became the first of many. While Sienna and Vanessa shopped for dresses or planned elaborate holiday parties, Grandpa and I sat in the basement, analyzing routes. He taught me how to read a bill of lading. He showed me how to balance a fleet distribution sheet so that no truck was ever running empty on a return trip. He never treated me like a child. He treated me like a student. "Logistics is not about trucks, Ariana," he told me once, his finger tracing a red line across a map of Chicago. "It is about the truth. People lie. They say they will be there. They say they have the cargo. But the system does not lie. The timestamp does not lie. If you control the system, you know the truth." Those words planted a seed in me that would eventually grow into glass-lined systems. But at the time, they just made me feel seen. However, even Grandpa could not stop the tide of Vanessa's influence upstairs. He was old, and he was tired, and he largely left the domestic disputes to my father. And my father had completely surrendered. The worst times were the holidays. Christmas in Maple Ridge was a performance art piece directed by Vanessa. The house was decorated with thousands of lights. There were catered parties with hundreds of guests. I was 15 the year I finally understood my place completely. It was 2 days before Christmas. Vanessa had hired a professional photographer to take the family portrait for the annual card. Everyone was dressed in coordinating shades of burgundy and gold. Sienna wore a velvet dress that cost more than my entire year's allowance. Vanessa looked like a queen. My father looked proud. I came downstairs wearing the dress I had bought for myself. A simple black dress. The only nice thing I owned. Vanessa looked at me and frowned, a tiny wrinkle appearing between her perfectly shaped brows. "Oh, Ariana," she said, her voice dripping with sympathetic disappointment. "Black? It is so somber. It really clashes with the warm tones we are all wearing. You look like you are going to a funeral, sweetie." My father looked at me, then at the coherent visual unit of his wife and stepdaughter. "It is a bit dark, Ari," he muttered. "I can stand in the back," I offered, my voice small. "Actually," Vanessa said, clapping her hands together as if she had a brilliant idea, "the caterers are running behind with the appetizers for the open house tonight. Ariana, you are so good at organizing. Would you mind terribly helping them set up the trays in the kitchen? We can snap the photo quickly while you handle that crisis. You hate having your picture taken anyway, right?" She looked at me with a smile that dared me to contradict her. If I said I wanted to be in the photo, I was being vain and unhelpful. If I agreed, I was erasing myself. I looked at my father. He was adjusting his tie in the mirror, not looking at me. He didn't say, "No, wait for Ariana." He didn't say, "She is my daughter. She belongs in the picture." He just said, "Thanks, kiddo. That would be a big help." I turned around and walked into the kitchen. I spent the next hour arranging shrimp puffs and cheese straws on silver platters, while laughter drifted in from the living room. I heard the photographer say, "Perfect family. Smile." Later, when the card was printed and mailed to 300 of the most important people in Ohio, it featured Mark, Vanessa, Sienna, And Grandpa Henry. There was no Ariana. When neighbors asked where I was, Vanessa had a practiced answer ready. Oh, Ariana is going through a phase. She refused to come out of her room. We try to give her space. I learned to live in that space. I learned that if I stayed quiet, if I stayed in the basement, if I made myself useful and invisible, I couldn't be hurt. I told myself that if I just worked harder, if I got better grades, if I understood the company better than anyone else, eventually my father would have to look at me. I thought merit could outweigh manipulation. I was naive. I did not know then that Vanessa viewed my silence not as submission, but as a threat. She saw the way Grandpa Henry looked at me when we talked about business. She saw that I was not the broken, moody teenager she painted me to be, but a threat to Sienna's inheritance. I thought the basement was my safe harbor. I did not know that 5 years later, she would turn it into my execution chamber. But looking back now, as the plane begins its descent toward the gray landscape of Ohio, I realized that the girl who sat in that basement studying maps was not just hiding, she was preparing. I was learning the terrain, I was memorizing the routes, and I was learning that in a world of lies, the person who controls the record of what actually happened holds all the power. My father forgot me, Vanessa erased me, but they forgot one crucial thing about the Everett bloodline. We don't just move things from point A to point B, we play the long game. And the game was about to change. The memory of that night does not begin with the pain. It begins with the smell of pine needles and expensive perfume, a cloying mixture that makes my stomach turn even now. A decade later. I was 20 years old. I was a sophomore at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, living in a dorm room that smelled of stale coffee and freedom. I had not planned on coming home for Christmas. The distance between Maple Ridge and Cleveland was only 2 hours by car. But emotionally, it felt like crossing an ocean. I had built a small, fragile life for myself away from the suffocating perfection of the Everett estate. I had friends who did not know my last name meant money. I had professors who graded me on my code, not my father's donations. But then the email had come. It was sent at 2 a.m, 3 days before the holiday break. The subject line was blank. The body of the text was short, typed with the hunt and peck rhythm of an old man who despised keyboards. Do not give up. I have a plan for you. Come home. It was signed simply, Grandpa. That email was the only reason I was standing in the foyer of the main house on Christmas Eve, wearing a sweater that I knew Vanessa would find tacky. Holding a glass of eggnog I had no intention of drinking, the house was screaming with wealth. Garlands of fresh balsam wrapped around the mahogany banisters. A 20-foot spruce dominated the great room, dripping with crystal ornaments that probably cost more than my tuition. My father was holding court by the fireplace, laughing loudly at a joke made by the local senator. He looked happy. He looked like a man who had everything he wanted. Sienna was there, of course, wearing a red silk dress, clinging to the arm of a quarterback from Ohio State, dazzling the room with her manufactured charm. I was invisible. I was the ghost at the feast. I endured an hour of it. I endured the polite nods from neighbors who didn't quite know how to talk to the difficult daughter. I endured Vanessa's saccharine greeting, where she kissed the air beside my cheek and whispered that I looked tired. When the noise became too much, I did what I had always done. I slipped away. I moved through the kitchen, dodging the catering staff who were frantically plating hors d'oeuvres, and opened the door to the basement. The air that hit me was cool and dry. It smelled of dust and old paper. It smelled like safety. I descended the stairs, the noise of the party fading into a dull thrum above my head. The basement was exactly as I had left it. The drafting table was there. The metal shelves were there. It was a museum of my grandfather's mind. I sat down at the heavy oak desk in the corner. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just tracing the grain of the wood, thinking about the email. I have a plan for you. What did he mean? Grandpa Henry had been withdrawing lately, spending more time in his study, less time at the office. My hand brushed against a loose file folder tucked beneath a stack of shipping manifests from 1985. It looked out of place. The tab was blank. Curiosity, that old itch I could never scratch enough, took over. I pulled the folder out. Inside, there were no charts or maps. There was a draft of a letter, written in Grandpa's distinct, jagged handwriting. It was addressed to his attorney, Evelyn Marsh. Evelyn, it read, I am concerned about the direction Mark is taking the Eastern expansion. He listens to the wrong voices. I am rewriting the allocation of the voting shares. I intend to place the controlling interest of the logistics group into a trust for Ariana. She is the only grandchild who understands the work. She is the only one who respects the system. Sienna is a lovely girl, but she sees the company as an ATM. Ariana sees it as a responsibility. My heart hammered against my ribs. The words swam before my eyes. Controlling interest, trust, Ariana. He saw me, all those years of silence, all those hours studying maps. He had seen it all. I wasn't the invisible disappointment. I was the heir. What do you think you are doing? The voice severed the moment like a guillotine. I spun around. Vanessa was standing at the bottom of the stairs. She had closed the heavy door behind her, shutting out the party, shutting out the world. The smile she wore for the guests was gone. Her face was a mask of cold, hard porcelain. I came down for some quiet, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I tried to slide the folder back onto the desk, to cover it with my hand, but I was not fast enough. Vanessa's eyes dropped to the paper under my palm. She didn't need to read it to know what it was. She was a predator. She could smell a threat in the air. Give me that, she said. It wasn't a request. It is Grandpa's, I said, standing up. It is private. She crossed the room in 3 long strides. For a woman who projected such delicate femininity, she moved with terrifying speed. She snatched the paper from under my hand before I could react. She read it. I watched her eyes dart back and forth across the lines. I saw the color drain from her face, replaced by a flush of pure, unadulterated rage. You little snake, she whispered. The venom in her voice was so concentrated it felt physical. You have been poisoning him. You come back here with your sad eyes and your cheap clothes, playing the victim, twisting a senile old man's mind. He is not senile, I said, my voice gaining strength. He is the only one in this house who sees things clearly. Vanessa crumpled the letter in her fist. This is garbage. This is a fantasy. This company belongs to your father, and one day it will provide for Sienna. You are nothing. You are a mistake Mark made 20 years ago. It says my name, Vanessa, I said. It says he wants me to lead. He doesn't know what he wants, she hissed. She stepped closer, invading my personal space, her perfume overwhelming the dusty air. You are going to go upstairs. You are going to smile, and tomorrow you are going to go back to Cleveland and stay there. If I see you near Henry again, I will make your life a living hell. Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the letter. Maybe it was the years of being told to sit in the back, to be quiet, to disappear. No, I said. The word hung in the silence between us. Vanessa blinked. She looked genuinely confused, as if the furniture had suddenly started speaking. Excuse me? I said no, I repeated, louder this time. I am not 12 years old anymore. You can't scare me into a corner. I have a right to be here. I have a right to know what Grandpa wants, and I'm going to tell Dad about this letter. I moved to step around her, heading toward the stairs. That was the mistake. I turned my back on her. I felt her hand grab my upper arm. It wasn't a gentle restraint. Her fingers dug in like talons, piercing the wool of my sweater, finding the tender skin beneath. She yanked me back with a strength that shocked me. You are not going anywhere, she snarled. The momentum sent me stumbling. I tried to catch my balance, but she shoved me. It was a hard, violent push, fueled by panic and fury. My shoulder slammed into the metal shelving unit. The impact rattled my teeth. A heavy box of files tipped over and crashed to the floor, spilling papers everywhere. Pain shot down my arm, hot and sharp. I gasped, clutching my shoulder, staring at her in disbelief. You just hit me. I am disciplining you, she screamed, though she kept her voice pitched low enough not to carry upstairs. You are hysterical. You are out of control. I am going to tell them, I cried out, tears of shock pricking my eyes. I am going to go upstairs right now and show them who you really are. I lunged for the stairs again. Vanessa grabbed the nearest thing to her. It was an old wooden broom that had been leaning against the furnace for as long as I could remember. The handle was thick, solid ash. She swung it. She didn't swing it like a person trying to block someone. She swung it like a weapon. The wood connected with the side of my hip, just above the bone. The sound was a dull, sickening thud. The pain was blinding. It wasn't just a bruise. It felt like my body was being torn apart. I screamed but the sound died in my throat, turning into a choked sob. My legs gave out. I collapsed onto the cold concrete floor, my hands scrabbling for purchase on the grit. Shut up! Vanessa stood over me, her chest heaving. The broom handle gripped tight in her manicured hands. Her eyes were wide, wild, unrecognizable. Look at you. Look at what you make me do. You are sick, Ariana. You are sick in the head. She raised the makeshift weapon again and brought it down on my shoulder, the same one that had hit the shelf. I curled into a ball, covering my head with my arms. I was 20 years old. I was an adult. I could vote. I could drive. But in that moment, under the fluorescent hum of the basement lights, I was a helpless child being beaten by the wicked stepmother from a fairy tale gone wrong. The physical pain was excruciating, a throbbing fire in my hip, a sharp agony in my shoulder. But the psychological shock was worse. This was the woman who hosted charity galas. This was the woman who sat in the front pew at church. And she was beating me with a broom in the basement while jingle bells played faintly 2 floors above. Please, I whimpered. Stop. You are going to learn, she panted, delivering one final, stinging blow to my thigh. You are going to learn your place. I lay there, cheek pressed against the freezing cement. The dust tasted metallic. My body was trembling so hard my teeth chattered. Vanessa stepped back, dropping the broom. It clattered loudly on the floor. She smoothed her dress. She fixed a strand of hair that had come loose. The transformation was instant and terrifying. She was composing herself. She was already writing the script in her head. Ariana fell. Ariana had an episode. I couldn't move. I just stared straight ahead, my vision blurry with tears. My line of sight was level with the floor. Across the room, high up on the wall near the ceiling, was a small hopper window. It was the only window in the basement, a rectangle of glass that looked out onto the gravel driveway at the side of the house. Outside, it was pitch black, but then a light cut through the darkness. Twin beams of white light flooded the window. Headlights. A vehicle had pulled into the side drive, likely to drop off supplies or pick up staff. The vehicle stopped. The engine idled, a low vibration that I could feel through the concrete floor. Through the dirty glass, I could see the interior of the car illuminated by the dashboard lights. It was a black SUV, the company car. And sitting in the driver's seat was Miguel. Miguel, my grandfather's driver for 30 years. Miguel, who had taught me how to change a tire when I was 16. Miguel, who never said much but saw everything. He was looking down, from his vantage point in the high seat of the SUV, looking through the ground-level window. He had a direct line of sight into the basement. He wasn't looking at the furnace. He wasn't looking at the shelves. He was looking at me. I saw his face, framed by the darkness. His eyes were wide. His mouth was slightly open. His hand was frozen halfway to the dashboard. The interior light of the car was on, and I could see the red light of the radio unit, the intercom system, the house intercom system that connected the garage, the kitchen, and the basement. The realization hit me through the haze of pain. The intercom panel on the wall near the stairs, the one with the green talk button stuck in the on position from years of disuse. He hadn't just seen, he had heard. He had heard the accusation. He had heard the struggle. He had heard the thud of wood against bone. He had heard my plea for her to stop. Vanessa didn't know. She was standing with her back to the window, breathing hard, fixing her lipstick in the reflection of an old glass cabinet. She was oblivious to the beams of light cutting across the floor behind her. She walked over to me, her heels clicking ominously near my face. She crouched down. Her face was composed now, beautiful and terrifying. "Listen to me, Ariana," she whispered, her voice soft, like she was comforting a crying baby. "No one is going to believe you. You know that, right? If you say a word, I will tell everyone you attacked me. I will tell them you were looking for drug money. I will tell your father you finally snapped." She reached out and patted my cheek. The touch burned more than the slap. "Go upstairs, wash your face, put on a coat and leave through the side door. If I see you before New Year's, I will have you committed. Do you understand?" I didn't answer. I couldn't speak. She stood up, satisfied with my silence, and walked to the stairs. She paused at the door, looking back one last time with a look of pure disdain, then flipped the light switch, plunging me into semi-darkness before closing the door. I lay in the dark, the pain radiating through my body in waves. But I wasn't looking at the door she had just closed. I was looking at the window. The headlights were still there. Miguel hadn't moved. He raised a hand slowly and pressed it against the glass of his windshield. It was a small gesture, a silent signal. "I am here." I closed my eyes and let the tears finally fall hot and fast. Vanessa thought she had won. She thought she had buried the truth in the basement. She thought my silence was surrender. She was wrong. She had just given me the one thing I never had before. She had given me a witness. I dragged myself up, my hips screaming in protest, and limped toward the back exit. I would leave. I would go back to Cleveland. I would bleed in private. But I would not forget. And now I knew, with a certainty that chilled my blood more than the winter air, that I wasn't the only one who would remember this night. The seed of revenge wasn't planted when I read the letter. It was planted when I looked into the eyes of a driver through a dirty basement window and realized that for the first time in my life, the camera was rolling, the morning after the incident in the basement. I woke up with a shoulder that throbbed in time with my heartbeat and a hip that had turned a violent shade of purple, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the cold, sinking realization that waited for me downstairs. I had spent the night in my old room, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing what I would say to my father. I had the truth on my side. I had the bruises. I had the moral high ground. In my 20-year-old mind, I still believed that justice was a simple equation. Crime plus evidence equals punishment. I was wrong. In the Everett house, justice was not an equation. It was a negotiation. When I walked into the kitchen, the scene was set with the precision of a stage play. My father was sitting at the head of the antique pine table, staring into a mug of black coffee. He looked tired. His shoulders slumped, the posture of a man who had already been briefed on a disaster and was dreading the cleanup. Vanessa stood behind him, her hands resting possessively on his shoulders, kneading the tension out of his muscles. Sienna sat across from him, picking at a grapefruit, wearing an expression of practiced concern. The conversation stopped the moment I entered. "Dad," I said, my voice raspy. I pulled up the sleeve of my oversized sweatshirt to show the ugly mottled bruise forming on my upper arm. "We need to talk." Vanessa didn't flinch. She didn't look guilty. She looked sad. She looked like a mother who had spent all night worrying about a wayward child. "Mark," she said softly, squeezing his shoulder. "Be gentle." My father looked up at me. His eyes were not filled with anger at the woman who had beaten his daughter. They were filled with pity for me. "Ariana," he said, and his voice was heavy with disappointment. "Vanessa told me what happened last night." I froze. "She told you? Did she tell you she hit me with a broom handle because I found Grandpa's letter?" Sienna let out a sharp, shocked gasp. "Ariana, stop. Please. You are making it worse." "I am not making anything up," I said, my voice rising. "Look at my arm. Dad, look at it." My father stood up slowly. He walked over to me and looked at the bruise. For a second, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, but then Vanessa spoke, her voice calm and reasonable, the voice of sanity itself. "I told you she would bruise. Mark," Vanessa said. When I tried to pull her away from the shelves, she was thrashing so hard. She threw herself against the rack. I was terrified she was going to pull the whole unit down on top of herself. I had to restrain her for her own safety. I stared at her, my mouth falling open. The lie was so bold, so complete, that it took my breath away. "Restrain me? You attacked me." "You were screaming about the inheritance, Ariana," Vanessa continued, looking at my father, not me. "You were tearing through the boxes, saying that Henry promised you everything, saying that you were going to burn the papers if you couldn't have them. You were not yourself, sweetie. It was manic." "That is a lie," I shouted. The volume of my own voice startled me. "I was reading a letter. She came down and—" "See?" Sienna piped up, her voice trembling. "She is yelling again. My psychology professor said that academic stress can trigger episodes in people who are predisposed to instability. It is really common for students to break down when they come home for the holidays." My father rubbed his temples. He looked between his wife, his stepdaughter, and me. On one side, he had the two women who made his life comfortable, who presented a perfect image to the world. On the other side, he had me, the daughter who wore black, who challenged him, who was currently shouting in his kitchen. He chose the path of least resistance. He chose the lie because the truth was too inconvenient to handle. "Ariana," he said, holding up a hand to silence me, "I think you are under a lot of pressure at school. Vanessa says you seemed agitated the moment you arrived. Maybe you did overreact. Maybe you don't remember it exactly the way it happened." "I don't remember it?" I whispered. "I was there, Dad. I felt it." "The mind is a tricky thing when we are emotional," he said, reciting the script Vanessa had clearly fed him over breakfast. "Vanessa is not a violent person. Ari, she loves you. Why would she hurt you?" "Because of the letter," I insisted. "Grandpa wrote a letter about the company, about me." My father sighed, a long, ragged sound. "I asked Henry. He said he hasn't written any official letters. He said he is tired and doesn't want to be dragged into squabbles." My heart stopped. Vanessa had gotten to Grandpa first? Or maybe Grandpa was playing a game I didn't understand. Either way, I was alone. The walls of the kitchen felt like they were closing in. I looked at Vanessa. She offered me a small, tight smile, a victory lap that only I could see. "I think," Vanessa said, "that Ariana needs rest, and maybe she needs to go back to Cleveland a little early. The stimulation here is too much for her right now." I realized then that I was in a courtroom where the judge and jury had been bribed long before the trial began. Whatever I said would be twisted. My anger would be proof of my instability. My tears would be proof of my weakness. "I am going for a walk," I said, turning on my heel. "Ariana, wait," my father called out, but his voice lacked conviction. I walked out the back door, into the biting cold of the December morning. The air was sharp enough to freeze the tears in my eyes. I walked without direction, my boots crunching on the frozen grass, until I found myself near the old sugar maple tree at the edge of the property. It was a massive tree, its branches bare and black against the gray sky. Standing beneath it, wrapped in a heavy wool coat, was Grandpa Henry. He didn't turn around when I approached. He was staring out at the frozen pond. "I hear you had a difficult night," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel tumbling in a dryer. "You could say that," I replied, hugging my arms around my chest to protect my aching ribs. "Dad thinks I'm crazy. Vanessa says I threw myself into a shelf." Grandpa turned slowly. His eyes were sharp, blue, and unclouded. He looked at my face, studying the lines of exhaustion and pain. "I am old, Ariana," he said, "but I am not blind, and I am certainly not an idiot. Mark is a good man at heart, but he is weak. He mistakes peace for happiness. He would rather believe a pleasant lie than confront an ugly truth." He took a step closer to me. "Tell me, No spinning, no drama, just the facts. What happened in my basement? I hesitated. After the scene in the kitchen, I was terrified to trust anyone. But this was Henry Everett. He dealt in logistics. He dealt in reality. So I told him. I told him about finding the folder. I told him exactly what Vanessa said about him being senile. I told him about the shove, the broom, the way she panted when she swung it, the threats she whispered. And then I told him the part I hadn't mentioned in the kitchen. I wasn't the only one there. Grandpa, I said quietly. When I was on the floor, I saw headlights. Grandpa's eyes narrowed. Headlights? Through the hopper window, the side drive, someone was in the company SUV, the black one. They had the engine running. Grandpa went very still. Who was it? It was Miguel, I said. He was looking right at me through the window, and the interior light was on. I saw the red light on the dashboard. The intercom was active. Henry Everett let out a breath that clouded in the cold air. He looked toward the garage, then back at me. He didn't offer empty comfort. He didn't hug me and say it would be okay. He did something better. He believed me. Miguel, he murmured. He has driven for me for 30 years. He has never been late. He has never spoken out of turn. He reached out and placed a gloved hand on my uninjured shoulder. The weight of it was grounding. Listen to me. Ariana, he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. If you fight her today, you will lose. Mark is not ready to hear it. The family is not ready to see it. If you scream now, they will just call you loud. You have to wait until they are forced to listen. I can't stay here, I said, my voice breaking. I can't sleep under the same roof as her. I know, he said. Go back to school. Finish your degree. Learn everything you can about systems that cannot be manipulated, but do not think for 1 second that I'm letting this go. She tore up your letter, I told him. Paper is easy to destroy, Grandpa said, a glint of steel entering his eyes. But digital memory? That is harder. One day, the truth will need a witness who has carried it the longest. Don't you dare quit, Ariana. Don't you dare let them write you out of this company. He turned and began walking back toward the house. Go pack your bag. I have business to attend to. I watched him go. He didn't go into the main house. He walked straight to the detached garage office. From my bedroom window 20 minutes later, while I was shoving clothes into my duffel bag, I saw it happen. Grandpa Henry stood in the doorway of the garage office. Miguel was there, hat in his hand, head bowed. They spoke for a long time. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the body language. Miguel was gesturing, mimicking a shoving motion, pointing to his eyes, then pointing to the car. Then, I saw Miguel reach into his pocket. He pulled out a small, black square, an SD card. He handed it to Grandpa. Grandpa didn't put it in his pocket. He held it in his closed fist like a diamond. He said something to Miguel, and Miguel nodded solemnly. It looked like a pact, a vow of silence. Grandpa walked back to the house, the evidence of my assault safely in his grip. I knew, without being told, that he wouldn't show it to my father today. He wouldn't show it to the police. He was a strategist. He knew that if he played this card now, Vanessa would spin it, claim it was doctored, or destroy the family while he was too old to rebuild it. He was saving it. I zipped my bag shut. My heart was pounding, but the panic was gone. It was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I carried my bag downstairs. Vanessa was waiting in the hallway. She had anticipated my departure. She held a check in her hand. For your tuition, she said, holding it out, and for your silence. If you mention the basement to anyone, your aunts, your cousins, anyone, you won't be welcome here for Easter, or summer, or ever. I looked at the check. It was for $5,000, the price of my dignity. I took the check. Vanessa smiled, thinking she had bought me. Then, slowly and deliberately, I tore it in half, then in quarters. I let the pieces flutter to the Persian rug at her feet. I don't need your money, Vanessa, I said. My voice was steady. And I don't need to come back for Easter. I am done visiting. You will be back, she sneered. When you run out of cash and need a place to crash, you will come crawling back. When I come back, I said, looking her dead in the eye, I won't be crawling, and I won't be knocking on the door. I walked past her, out the front door, and into the cold. I didn't say goodbye to my father. I got into my old Honda Civic, started the engine, and drove down the long, winding driveway. As I passed the garage, Miguel was standing outside, washing the windshield of the SUV. He stopped as I approached. He didn't wave. He just looked at me and gave a single, sharp nod. I nodded back. I drove out of the gates of Maple Ridge without looking in the rearview mirror. I was leaving behind the father who couldn't protect me and the stepmother who wanted to break me. I was driving back to a tiny dorm room and a diet of instant noodles. But as I merged onto the interstate, watching the gray Ohio landscape blur past, I wasn't crying anymore. I was planning. Grandpa had the card, Miguel had the memory, and I had the rest of my life to become the person who could swing the hammer when the time was right. The gaslighting hadn't broken me. It had just hardened me into something they wouldn't be able to shatter next time. The drive back to Cleveland was the longest of my life, but it was also the last time I let myself cry over the Everett family. By the time I crossed the city limits, the tears had dried, leaving behind a salty, tight sensation on my skin that felt like armor. I was done being the victim in the basement. I was done being the daughter who waited for scraps of affection. I threw myself into survival mode. I transferred from Case Western to the Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. I chose Chicago because it was massive, loud, and indifferent. A place where you could disappear if you wanted to, or rise if you had the grit. I changed my major to systems engineering with a focus on cybersecurity and building automation. I didn't want to just understand how things moved, like my grandfather. I wanted to understand how things were watched. Those first 2 years in the city were a blur of caffeine, code, and exhaustion. I cut off all financial ties with my father. I didn't answer his calls. I returned his birthday checks uncashed to pay for tuition and rent for a studio apartment that smelled permanently of boiled cabbage. I worked 2 jobs. By day, I was a student, sitting in lecture halls absorbing everything I could about network architecture. By night, I worked the graveyard shift. Sometimes I was at a call center, listening to people scream about their cable bills. But the job that changed everything was the security booth at a high-end parking garage in the Loop. It was a quiet job, just me, a thermos of black coffee, and a wall of 20 monitors showing grayscale feeds of concrete ramps and parked cars. One night, around 3 a.m, a man in a tailored suit stumbled in, clearly intoxicated. He sideswiped a parked BMW, shattering the taillight. He didn't leave a note. He just drove off. 10 minutes later, the garage manager called me. He told me to delete the footage from camera 4. He said the man in the suit was a friend of the owner, and it was better if we didn't have a record of it. I sat there, my finger hovering over the delete key. It was so easy. One button, one keystroke, and the truth would vanish. The owner of the BMW would come back to a broken car and have no way to prove who did it. The man in the suit would get away with it because he had power and connections. I thought about the basement. I thought about Vanessa's face when she realized Miguel was outside. I thought about the broom handle and the lies she spun afterward. If Miguel hadn't been there, if he hadn't recorded it, my truth would have been deleted just as easily as this car accident. I didn't delete the footage. I copied it to a flash drive before wiping the system as ordered. The next day, I mailed the drive anonymously to the owner of the BMW. But the incident sparked a fire in my brain. The problem wasn't the cameras. Cameras were everywhere. The problem was the storage. The problem was that the people in power, the managers, the owners, the Vanessas of the world, held the keys to the evidence. I started coding. My apartment became a fortress of electronics. I slept on a mattress on the floor because I couldn't afford a bed frame. My desk was a folding table I found in an alley. I ate instant ramen 5 nights a week and peanut butter sandwiches the other 2. My friends from school went to parties. I stayed home and built a digital architecture that couldn't be bullied. I called it Glassline. The concept was simple but radical. I wanted to create a building security system where the data wasn't just stored, It was chained. Every second of footage was encrypted and logged in a decentralized ledger instantly. Once a camera saw something, it was written in stone. A manager couldn't delete it. An owner couldn't edit it. Even I couldn't change it. It was the Miguel protocol turned into software. When I graduated, I had offers. Big defense contractors and tech giants offered me six-figure salaries to come and manage their firewalls. It was tempting. I had $17 in my checking account the day I walked across the stage to get my diploma. The idea of safety, of a steady paycheck, was seductive. But I turned them all down. I roped in two classmates, Ben, a hardware genius who could make a camera out of a toaster, and Sarah, a wizard with user interfaces. We worked out of my living room for the first 6 months. We pitched glass-line systems to every property management firm in Chicago. They all said no. "Why would we want a system we can't control?" a landlord asked me, laughing as he swirled his scotch. "If a tenant slips and falls, I want to be able to manage the liability, not hand them a lawsuit on a silver platter." Because transparency builds trust, I argued, and because eventually, the law is going to demand it. He showed me the door. We were weeks away from bankruptcy. I was behind on rent. I was hiding from my landlord. Ben was talking about taking a job at Best Buy. I sat on my floor, staring at the schematic of the system, feeling the weight of failure pressing down on my chest. I thought about going home. I thought about apologizing to Vanessa. Then, I thought about Grandpa Henry. "Don't you dare quit." Ariana. I didn't quit. I pivoted. If landlords didn't want the truth, I had to find someone who did. I secured a meeting with the board of a mid-sized hospital network in the Midwest. They were dealing with a PR nightmare. A nurse had been accused of mistreating a patient, but the footage had mysteriously been corrupted. The family was suing for millions. The hospital's reputation was in tatters. I walked into that boardroom wearing a suit I bought at a thrift store. I looked them in the eye and said, "If you had Glassline, this lawsuit wouldn't exist. Either the nurse did it, and you would have fired her immediately to save face, or she didn't, and you could prove it in seconds. The ambiguity is what is costing you money." I set up a demo. I had Ben try to hack our system live in front of them. He couldn't do it. I had the CEO try to delete a file. He couldn't do it. We walked out with a contract worth $200,000. That was the turning point. The hospital system worked flawlessly. 6 months later, our footage exonerated a doctor in a malpractice claim. The insurance companies took notice. They realized that buildings with Glassline systems were lower risk because the truth lowered legal costs. They started offering premium discounts to clients who installed our tech. Suddenly, we weren't begging for meetings. They were calling us. Glassline systems exploded. We moved out of my apartment into a loft in the West Loop, then to a sleek office tower downtown. We hired 10 people, then 50, then 200. By the time I was 28, I was on the cover of Chicago Tech Monthly. The headline read, "The Watcher, Ariana Cantu makes the world transparent." I remember sitting in the interview for that profile. The journalist, a sharp woman with inquisitive eyes, asked me about my background. "You are from Ohio originally, right?" she asked, her pen hovering over her notebook. "The name Cantu, is that local? Or are you related to the Everett family down in Maple Ridge?" I saw a connection in some old public records. My heart skipped a beat, but my face remained a mask of professional calm. I had trained for this. "My mother was a Cantu," I said smoothly. "I grew up in a small town, but my life is here in Chicago. Glassline is my family." I steered the conversation back to encryption protocols and market shares. I never mentioned Mark Everett. I never mentioned the estate. I certainly never mentioned Vanessa. But privately, I was obsessed. While my peers were buying penthouses and Teslas, I was living well below my means. I poured my salary into a diversified portfolio, but with a very specific target. I set up 3 shell companies, innocuous LLCs with boring names like Blue Horizon Holdings and Apex Logistics Ventures. Through these companies, I began to buy shares of Everett Logistics Group. Grandpa Henry still held the majority of the voting stock, but there were public shares, non-voting shares, and small blocks that occasionally came up for sale from distant cousins or retired board members. Every time a block became available, I bought it. I wasn't trying to take over the company yet. I didn't have that kind of capital. I was building a foothold. I wanted to make sure that when the day came, I wasn't just a granddaughter with a claim. I was a shareholder with a voice. Every morning, before I checked the Glassline servers, I checked the stock price of Everett Logistics. I read their quarterly reports. I analyzed their route expansions. I watched from afar as my father made safe, mediocre decisions that kept the company afloat but stagnant. I saw Vanessa's name pop up in the society pages, hosting galas funded by the dividends of the company I was quietly buying. It was a strange, lonely power. I was the architect of a system that exposed secrets, yet my entire life was a secret. I had boyfriends who didn't know I was an heiress. I had employees who thought I was a self-made orphan. The only person who knew the truth was a ghost in my machine. In the bottom drawer of my desk, locked in a fireproof safe, I kept a copy of the schematics for Glassline's original kernel, and taped to the inside of the folder was a small, yellow sticky note. It had no words on it, just a drawing of a pair of headlights. It was my reminder. I wasn't building this company for money. I was building it to prove a hypothesis, that if you shine a light bright enough, the shadows have nowhere to hide. Then came the call. It was a Tuesday in November. The sky over Chicago was the color of bruised iron. I was in the middle of a code review with my lead engineer when my personal cell phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was 6144. Columbus. I stepped out of the conference room, my pulse quickening. "This is Ariana," I said. "Ariana, this is Evelyn Marsh." The name hit me like a physical blow. Evelyn Marsh, Grandpa's lawyer, the woman who had been the keeper of the secret since before I was born. "Ms. Marsh," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "Is he? He is still with us," Evelyn said, her tone professional but soft. "But he is declining rapidly. Ariana, the doctors say it is a matter of days, perhaps a week." I closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against the cool glass of the window. I had visited him secretly over the years, short trips where we talked about business and books, never discussing the basement, never discussing the return. We both knew we were waiting for the signal. "Is everything ready?" I asked. "The papers are finalized," Evelyn said. "The trust is active. The moment he passes, the mechanism triggers, but there is a condition." "What condition?" "He wants you to handle the announcement. He doesn't want me to read the will to a room full of shocked people while you are in Chicago. He wants you there. He wants you to take the seat at the head of the table." I looked out at the city I had conquered. I looked at the reflection of the woman in the glass. The CEO, the founder, the millionaire. She looked strong. She looked ready. "Tell him I am coming," I said. "And Ariana?" Evelyn added. "He wanted me to tell you one more thing. He said to tell you that the basement has been renovated, but he kept the old intercom system. He said you would know what that means." I felt a chill run down my spine, not of fear, but of anticipation. "I know what it means," I said. I hung up the phone. I didn't go back to the code review. I walked to my office, unlocked the safe, and took out the sticky note with the headlights. I crumpled it in my hand, not because I wanted to destroy it, but because I didn't need the reminder anymore. The waiting was over. The acquisition phase was complete. It was time for the hostile takeover. I picked up my office phone and dialed my assistant. "Cancel my meetings for the rest of the week," I said. "And get the jet ready. I have a funeral to attend, and after that, I have a board meeting." The office of Evelyn Marsh was located on the 44th floor of a limestone tower on Wacker Drive, a space that smelled of old money, mahogany, and the terrifying precision of contract law. I was 28 years old when I sat in her leather wingback chair, my hands folded in my lap, trying to stop the tremors that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Evelyn was 70, a woman carved from granite and wrapped in Chanel. She had been my grandfather's personal attorney for 40 years. She knew where every body was buried, and more importantly, she knew who paid for the shovel. She slid a thick document across the polished desk toward me. It was bound in heavy blue paper. "This," Evelyn said, her voice dry and crisp, "is the fourth codicil to the last will and testament of Henry Everett. It was executed 2 years ago, fully notarized, and sealed under attorney-client privilege. Your father does not know it exists. Vanessa certainly does not know it exists." I looked at the document. The title was innocuous enough, but as I turned the page and began to read the dense legal paragraphs, the room seemed to tilt on its axis. Clause 7. Disposition of voting shares. I hereby transfer, assign, and bequeath all Class A voting shares of Everett Logistics Group, representing 51% of the controlling interest, into the Everett Family Trust. I scanned down to the next section, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Clause 8. Appointment of trustee. The sole trustee and primary beneficiary of the Everett Family Trust shall be Ariana Elena Cantu. The trustee shall have absolute discretion over the assets, including but not limited to the voting rights of the shares, the real property known as the Maple Ridge Estate, and the liquid assets contained therein. I stopped reading. I looked up at Evelyn. The silence in the room was deafening. "He gave it to me," I whispered. "He gave me the company." "He gave you the control," Evelyn corrected, leaning forward. "Your father, Mark, retains his Class B shares. He will still receive dividends. He will still be wealthy, but he will not have a vote. He will not have a seat on the board unless you give him one. And Vanessa? She gets nothing. The estate house, the grounds, the cars, they belong to the trust, which means, effectively, they belong to you." "Why?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "Dad is his son. This will destroy him." "Your grandfather does not see it as destruction," Evelyn said. "He sees it as correction." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. "There is a condition, Ariana, a procedural requirement that Henry was adamant about. The transfer of power does not happen quietly in this office. It must happen at the estate." She turned back to me. "The instructions are specific. Following the funeral, there will be a gathering at the main house. Mark and Vanessa will believe it is a standard reading of the will, where they inherit everything. You will be there. You will take the seat at the head of the table. And before I read the legal text, you will read a personal letter from Henry to the family. Only then will the codicil be revealed." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. It was a trap, a theatrical, public dismantling of their assumptions. "He wants a scene," I said. "He wants a witnessing," Evelyn replied. "He wants them to look you in the eye when the gavel comes down." The weight of it hit me then. This wasn't just paper. This was the culmination of a conversation that had started 6 months prior, in a sterile hospital room in Columbus. I let my mind drift back to that day. It was mid-July. The humidity in Ohio was suffocating, but inside the cardiac wing of the university hospital, the air was frigid. Grandpa Henry was hooked up to a constellation of monitors. The steady beep, beep, beep was the only soundtrack to our lives. He looked small in the bed, the titan of industry, the man who moved millions of tons of freight across the continent, had withered, but his eyes were the same, piercing, blue, and terrifyingly lucid. I sat by his bedside, holding his hand. His skin felt like dry parchment. "I watched it again," he said suddenly. His voice was weak, barely a rasp, but the words were distinct. I didn't need to ask what he meant. "Grandpa, don't—" "I watched it," he repeated. "The video from Miguel's car. I watch it once a year, on Christmas Eve." I looked away, staring at the floor tiles. "Why do you torture yourself?" "To remember," he said. He squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "To remember what cowardice looks like. My cowardice." "You weren't there," I said softly. "You didn't know." "I knew enough," he snapped, angry at himself. "I knew Vanessa was a shark. I knew Mark was a soft man who wanted peace more than he wanted justice, but that video, Ariana, when I saw her strike you, when I saw you fall. His breath hitched, the monitors speeding up their rhythm. He closed his eyes for a moment, composing himself. When he opened them, the sadness was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I cannot undo the bruise, Ariana, he said. I cannot give you back the years you spent feeling alone. I cannot fix the acts of the past, but I can fix the structure that allowed them to happen. The structure? I asked. A family business is not just about money, he said. It is about power. Who holds it? Who wields it? Mark holds power because I gave it to him. Assuming he would grow into it, he did not. He gave it to his wife, and she used it to hurt my blood. He pointed a shaking finger at the nightstand. Open the drawer. I opened it. Inside was a single brass key. It looked heavy, old-fashioned. That is for Box 17 at the First National Bank in Maple Ridge, he said. It is in your name now. No one else has access. Not Mark, not the lawyers, just you. What is in it? The original SD card from Miguel, he said. And a letter. A letter I wrote the night I saw the footage. I wrote down exactly what I saw, exactly what I felt, and exactly why I am doing what I'm doing. If they ever try to challenge the will, if Vanessa ever tries to claim I was senile or manipulated, you open that box, you play the tape, you read the letter, it is your shield, Ariana, and it is your sword. There was a knock on the door then, it opened, and Miguel walked in. He was older now, his hair completely white, but he still wore his driver's uniform, pressed and immaculate. He held his cap in his hands, twisting the brim nervously. Sir, Miguel said, nodding to Henry. Then he looked at me. Miss Ariana. Come in, Miguel, Grandpa whispered. Miguel approached the bed. He looked at me, his dark eyes filled with a decade of unexpressed sorrow. I hope you are well, Miss. I am well, Miguel, I said. Thanks to you. Miguel looked down at his shoes. I should have gotten out of the car. I should have broken down the door. Every night. I pray for forgiveness that I stayed in the seat. No, Grandpa Henry said firmly. The authority in his voice silenced the room. If you had gotten out, Miguel, it would have been your word against hers. She would have fired you. She would have called the police on you. She would have spun a story that you were the aggressor. You stayed. You recorded. You witnessed. Grandpa reached out and took Miguel's hand, the hand of a servant, held by the hand of a master. Sometimes, Grandpa said, looking between us, the witness who stays silent is the only reason the truth survives long enough to matter. You gave Ariana the weapon she needs. Never apologize for that. Miguel nodded, tears standing in his eyes. I will be there, sir. When the time comes, I will drive the car. I will stand by the door. Good, Grandpa said. He sank back into the pillows, exhausted. Now, both of you, leave me. I have to rest, and I have to sign the papers Evelyn is bringing. The memory faded, bringing me back to the scent of mahogany in the Chicago office. Evelyn was watching me closely. She saw the emotion on my face, the conflict warring behind my eyes. It feels like theft, I admitted, my voice low. My father. He has spent his whole life waiting for this. He thinks it is his birthright, to walk in there and take it, to blindside him in front of everyone. Am I any better than Vanessa? Evelyn sat down. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Let me explain something to you about estate law. Ariana, she said. But more importantly, about your grandfather. Henry Everett was a builder. He built systems. He understood that if a foundation is rotten, you don't paint over it. You tear it out. She tapped the blue folder. Mark believes he is inheriting a company. He is not. He is inheriting a responsibility he is not equipped to handle. If Mark takes over, Vanessa runs Everett Logistics. Within 5 years, she will strip mine it for assets to fund her lifestyle and Sienna's vanity projects. The company will fail. The workers will lose their jobs. The legacy will vanish. Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes hard. "You are not stealing the company. Ariana, you are saving it. And as for the blind side, yes, it is brutal, but it is necessary." "Why?" I asked. "Because if Mark knows beforehand, Vanessa will have time to maneuver," Evelyn said. "She will launch legal injunctions. She will freeze the assets. She will destroy documents. She will manipulate the narrative in the press before the body is even cold." Henry knew this. The only way to win this war is to end it the second it begins. You have to walk into that room and drop the hammer before they even know there is a trial. I looked down at the codicil again. Clause 8, sole trustee. I thought about the girl on the basement floor. I thought about the broom handle. I thought about the check Vanessa tore up in my face. Or rather, the check I tore up in hers. I wasn't that girl anymore. I was the CEO of Glassline Systems. I commanded hundreds of employees. I protected millions of gigabytes of data. I knew how to lead. And Grandpa Henry was right. My father was a good man, but he was a weak king. And a weak king is just a puppet for the person standing behind the throne. "The letter," I said, looking up at Evelyn. "The one I have to read at the gathering. Do you have it?" "It is in box 17, Evelyn said. "Along with the memory card. You are to retrieve them the morning of the funeral, not a moment sooner." She slid a pen across the desk. "You need to sign the acceptance of the trusteeship. Ariana, once you sign this, there is no going back. You become the legal adversary of your father and stepmother. You become the head of the family." I picked up the pen. It was heavy, cool to the touch. It felt like a tool. "Evelyn," I said, hesitating one last time. "Did he say anything else? About me? Not about the company, but about me?" Evelyn's expression softened. Just a fraction. "He said that you were the only one who never asked for anything," she said quietly. "Everyone else asked for money, for favors, for introductions. You just asked for a chance to learn. He said he is not giving you this weapon to punish them. He is giving it to you because it is something you should have had all along. He is simply picking up the shield you dropped in the basement 10 years ago and handing it back to you." The shield I dropped. I took a deep breath. I uncapped the pen. The ink was black, permanent. I signed my name, Ariana Elena Cantu. I put the pen down. "Tell the executors I will be there," I said, "and tell Miguel to have the car ready at the airport. I am coming home." Evelyn nodded, closing the folder with a definitive thump. "The funeral is Saturday," she said. "The reading is at 4. Wear something intimidating. Ariana." I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress. I walked to the door, feeling a strange lightness in my chest. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. All that was left was the logistics. "Don't worry, Evelyn," I said, looking back at her. "I am not coming to mourn. I am coming to work." I walked out of the office and into the elevator. As the doors closed, I watched the numbers count down. 44, 43, 42. In 2 days, I would be in Maple Ridge. In 2 days, I would open box 17. In 2 days, the silence of the last 10 years would end, not with a whisper, but with the reading of a will that would shatter the glass house Vanessa had built. I checked my watch. It was 3 o'clock. "Time to go to the bank," I said to the empty elevator. The plan was in motion, and unlike my father, I wasn't going to blink. The rental SUV crunched over the packed snow as I passed the peeling white sign that read, "Welcome to Maple Ridge. Population 12,000. It had been 10 years since I last saw that sign. Back then, I saw it through the rear window of a Honda Civic, blurry with tears, feeling like a refugee fleeing a war zone. Today, I saw it through the windshield of a black Cadillac Escalade. My eyes dry, my hands steady on the leather steering wheel. I wasn't fleeing this time. I was invading. The town looked exactly the same, frozen in a picturesque stagnation that people mistake for charm. The main street was lined with brick buildings adorned with plastic snowflakes. The diner where I used to study was still there. The hardware store where I bought my first soldering iron was still there. It felt like walking into a museum exhibit of my own trauma. I didn't drive straight to the estate. I had one stop to make first. I pulled into the parking lot of the First National Bank. It was a sturdy, self-serious building with marble pillars that seemed ridiculous for a town this size. I adjusted my coat, a sharp, tailored trench that cost more than the car I drove in college, and stepped out into the biting wind. The bank manager, a man named Mr. Henderson, who used to play golf with my father, looked up as I entered. He squinted, trying to place me. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked. "I need to access a safety deposit box," I said, my voice cool and professional. "Box 17. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Box 17? That box has been sealed under Henry Everett's name for years. You would need—" I placed the heavy brass key on the counter. It made a solid, dull sound against the granite. Then I slid my driver's license next to it. "I am the sole authorized signatory as of Tuesday," I said. "Check your system, Mr. Henderson." He typed for a moment, his eyebrows climbing higher with every keystroke. When he looked up, the condescension was gone, replaced by a nervous deference. "Of course, Ms. Cantu, right this way." The vault smelled of old currency and dust. Mr. Henderson left me alone in a small viewing room with the long metal box. My heart rate spiked. Just for a second, this was it. The Pandora's box Grandpa Henry had left for me. I unlocked it. Inside, there was a single manila envelope, no stacks of cash, no diamonds, just paper and plastic. I slid the contents out. First, a black SD card. It was an older model, a bit bulky compared to the ones we used at Glassline now, but it looked pristine. I held it in my palm. It weighed nothing, yet it contained the heavy, ugly truth of an entire decade. Next was a handwritten note on a scrap of paper. "Coordinates for backup drive. Miguel has it." It was followed by a string of numbers. Grandpa, ever the logistician, believed in redundancy. Finally, a letter on his personal stationery. I unfolded it. His handwriting was shaky, written likely in the hospital during those last weeks. "My dearest Ariana, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you have returned to the place that hurt you. I am sorry. I am sorry I did not come down to the basement that night. I'm sorry I let you leave. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but I was just keeping my eyes closed. I am giving you this company not as an apology, but as a correction. Power without truth is just tyranny, and this family has been tyrannical for too long. But listen to me. Do not use this to destroy them for sport. Use it to end the cycle. Break the structure that allows the strong to silence the weak. Miguel is waiting. He knows what to do. Love, Grandpa." I folded the letter and placed it in my inside pocket, right next to my heart. I put the SD card in the zippered compartment of my purse. "Thank you, Grandpa," I whispered to the empty room. "I won't just break the structure. I am going to demolish it." I left the bank and drove the final 5 miles to the estate. The iron gates were open. The long driveway was plowed. The snow piled high on either side like white walls. The house loomed at the end, a Victorian monster of red brick and black shutters. It looked beautiful. It looked like a lie. I didn't park in the front circle where the guests would arrive tomorrow. I drove around the side, toward the detached 6-car garage. This was where the staff lived. This was where the real work happened. The garage door was open. A man was polishing the chrome bumper of a vintage Rolls-Royce. He moved slowly, his back curved in a permanent stoop. I put the car in park and stepped out. "Miguel," I said. He froze. He turned around slowly, holding a rag in his hand. His hair was completely white now, and deep lines were etched around his eyes. But when he saw me, those eyes lit up with a warmth that cut through the winter chill. "Miss Ariana," he breathed. He didn't bow. He didn't call me ma'am. He dropped the rag and walked toward me. We met in the middle of the garage, amidst the smell of gasoline and floor wax, and hugged. It wasn't the polite hug of relatives. It was the desperate, clinging hug of 2 soldiers who had survived the same war. "You came," he said, pulling back to look at me. "I was afraid you wouldn't." "I had to," I said. We have work to do. Miguel glanced toward the main house, his expression hardening. It is bad inside. Miss Ariana, Mrs. Vanessa. She is in rare form. What is she saying? She is telling everyone that you are coming to beg, Miguel said, his voice low. She told the cook that you are broke. She told the groundskeeper that Mark is inheriting everything and that they are going to bulldoze the guest cottage to build a pool house for Sienna. She is preparing them for a coronation. I smiled, a sharp, cold expression. Let her build her castle in the air. It will make the fall more spectacular. I reached into my bag and pulled out a sleek, portable drive, a glass-line encrypted drive. I have the SD card from the bank, I said, but I need you to do something for me tonight, for the gathering tomorrow. Anything, Miguel said immediately. The reading is in the library, right? Yes, Mrs. Vanessa has set up the chairs already. I need you to set up a screen, I said. A big one. Tell them it is for a video tribute to Henry, a montage of photos. They will love that. It feeds their vanity. But I need you to hook it up to this drive. And I need sound. Good sound. Can you do that? Miguel looked at the drive, then up at me. He understood. If I do that, Mark will fire me before the video is even finished. Mark won't have the authority to fire you, I said steadily. Trust me. Miguel took the drive. His hand didn't shake. I will set it up tonight while they are at dinner. I will say it was Henry's last request to have a slideshow. Good, I said. I will see you tomorrow. Miguel, stay invisible until 4 o'clock. I walked out of the garage and headed toward the side door of the main house. The wind whipped my hair across my face, stinging my cheeks. I opened the door and stepped into the mudroom. The smell hit me instantly. Lavender and expensive cleaning products. The smell of my childhood oppression. I walked into the kitchen. It was bustling with caterers prepping for the wake. Standing in the center of the chaos, directing a poor girl with a tray of canapés, was Vanessa. She looked exactly the same, perhaps a little tighter around the eyes. Her skin smoothed by expensive dermatologists. She wore a black dress that was tasteful, but cut low enough to be interesting. She turned and saw me. The room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ariana, she said. She didn't move to hug me. She didn't smile. She just looked me up and down, assessing my coat, my boots, my posture. You actually came. Grandpa asked me to, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Well, she said, letting out a short, dismissive breath. I suppose he was sentimental at the end. The dementia made him reach out to odd places. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so the caterers wouldn't hear. I hope you didn't bring a lot of luggage. The guest rooms are full with family, real family. I had the maid set up a cot in the sewing room for you. It was a power move, a petty, small attempt to make me feel like a servant. 10 years ago, I would have flinched. I would have accepted the cot and cried myself to sleep. I am staying at the Marriott in town, I lied smoothly. I just came to pay my respects to Dad. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. Suit yourself, though I doubt Mark has time for you. He is devastated. Poor man. He has the weight of the entire empire on his shoulders now. Just then, Sienna walked in. She was holding a glass of wine, looking bored. She wore black silk and pearls. Oh, Sienna said, looking at me over the rim of her glass. You are here. Mom said you might show up. Hello, Sienna, I said. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about Chicago. She just looked at me like I was a piece of furniture that had been returned to the wrong store. You look different, harder. City life, I said. Where is Dad? In the study, Vanessa said, turning her back on me to shout at a waiter. Don't upset him. Ariana, he is very fragile. I walked past them, through the dining room where the long table was set for a dinner I wasn't invited to, and down the hall to the study. The door was ajar. I pushed it open. My father was sitting in Grandpa's leather chair. He looked small in it. He held a tumbler of scotch in one hand and was staring blankly at a stack of condolence cards. He looked gray. The vitality Vanessa had brought into his life seemed to have sucked the life out of him in return. "Dad?" I said softly. He looked up. For a second, he looked confused, as if he was seeing a ghost. Then his face crumpled. "Ari," he said. He stood up, swaying slightly. "You came." He walked over and hugged me. He smelled of scotch and grief. I hugged him back, but my arms felt stiff. I loved him. He was my father, but I couldn't forget that he was also the man who had looked at my bruises and told me I was imagining things. "How are you holding up?" I asked, stepping back. "It is a lot," he muttered, running a hand through his thinning hair. "The funeral logistics, the board members calling, everyone wants to know what happens next." "And what does happen next?" I asked, testing him. "Well," he said, glancing at the door as if checking for Vanessa. "I take over, obviously. It is what Henry wanted. It is what we prepared for. Vanessa has some great ideas about rebranding. She wants to modernize the fleet." "Vanessa wants to modernize the fleet?" I repeated. "Does she know anything about logistics?" "She has vision, Ari," Mark said defensively. "She has been my partner in this. Look, let's not talk business. Not now. I just want peace. Can we just have peace this weekend? No drama. No bringing up. Old history." I looked at him. Really looked at him. He wasn't malicious. He was just a coward. He was terrified of conflict. He would let Vanessa burn the company to the ground as long as she did it quietly and kept him comfortable. "I want peace too, Dad," I said. "But real peace, not just silence." He looked relieved, missing the subtext entirely. Good girl. Why don't you go say hi to everyone? I need to finish this drink." He sat back down, dismissing me. He was already retreating into his bottle, hiding from the reality of leading a company he wasn't fit to run. I walked out of the study and headed for the back of the house. I needed air. I found the door to the terrace and stepped out. It was twilight now. The snow in the backyard was turning blue in the fading light. I walked to the edge of the stone balcony. Beneath me lay the sprawling garden, buried in white, and directly below my feet was the basement window. The snow had been cleared away from it, likely by Miguel. The glass was dark. But as I watched, a small light flickered inside, a flashlight beam. It moved across the window pane, then stopped. It flashed once, twice. Miguel was down there. He was checking the wires. He was testing the connection. I placed my hand on the cold stone railing. 10 years ago, I had looked out that window and seen a witness. Tonight, the witness was inside, preparing the stage. "Get ready, Vanessa," I whispered to the wind. "The basement is about to have a voice." I turned and looked back at the house. Through the French doors, I could see the warm glow of the chandeliers, the silhouette of Vanessa laughing with a guest, the perfect image of the grieving widow in waiting. They were feasting on the corpse of a legacy they didn't understand, but tomorrow, at 4 o'clock, the feast would end. I pulled my coat tighter and walked back inside. I wouldn't eat their food. I wouldn't drink their wine. I would go to my hotel. I would review the documents one last time, and I would sharpen the blade. The infiltration was complete. Now, we just had to wait for the signal. The last black limousine had pulled away down the snow-packed driveway. The final condolence had been offered, the last casserole dish stored in the refrigerator, and the heavy oak doors of the main house were finally bolted shut against the winter evening. The silence that descended on the Everett estate was thick and suffocating. It was the silence of a stage after the audience has left, leaving the actors alone with their exhausted, unmasked selves. We gathered in the main library. It was a room designed to intimidate, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a roaring fireplace that was big enough to roast a whole pig, and heavy velvet drapes that shut out the night. My father, Mark, poured himself a double scotch, his hand shaking slightly. Vanessa sat in a high-backed wing chair near the fire, kicking off her heels and massaging her feet. She looked bored. To her, the performance was over. She had played the grieving daughter-in-law perfectly, and now she was just waiting for the paperwork that would crown her queen. Sienna was scrolling on her phone in the corner. My 2 aunts and an uncle, My father's siblings, who had long ago been bought out of the company, sat on the leather sofa, looking anxious, waiting to see if there were any crumbs left for them in Henry's will. Evelyn Marsh stood by the desk, her briefcase resting on the mahogany surface like a weapon. I stood next to her. Miguel was by the door, standing in the shadows, his hands clasped behind his back. "Well," Vanessa sighed, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. "Let's get this over with. Evelyn, we are all exhausted. I assume Henry left everything to Mark as planned? We can sign the papers and get some sleep." Evelyn didn't open her briefcase. She looked at me. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the room, "before Evelyn reads a single word, there is something we need to do." Vanessa looked up, annoyed. "Ariana, please, not now. We have had enough drama for 1 week." "I agree," I said, "which is why we are going to finish it. I want everyone to come downstairs with me, to the basement." The room went dead silent. My father froze with his glass halfway to his mouth. "The basement?" Mark asked, confused. "Why on earth would we go down there? It is freezing, and it is full of junk." "It is not full of junk anymore, Mark," I said, "and it is where Grandpa Henry wanted us to start this meeting." "That is ridiculous," Vanessa snapped, sitting up straighter. Henry was confused at the end. "We are not dragging everyone down to a damp cellar just to indulge some senile whim or one of your childhood fixations. We are doing this here, in a civilized manner." I turned my body so I was facing her directly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Civilized?" I repeated. "There is nothing civilized about what happened in this house. Vanessa, the solemnity of this moment does not come from the leather chairs or the expensive scotch. It comes from whether or not we have the courage to look at the places where we hid our secrets." I looked at my father. "Dad, please, just humor me. 10 minutes. That is all I ask." Mark looked at Vanessa, then at me. He saw the steel in my eyes. He saw the ghost of his father in my posture. He sighed, putting his drink down. "Fine," he said, rubbing his temples. "Let's just get it over with so Ariana can be satisfied." Vanessa huffed, slipping her shoes back on with aggressive movements. "Unbelievable. This is the last time. Ariana, after tonight, I am done with your games." "I promise," I said. "After tonight, there will be no more games." I led the way. We walked through the kitchen, a procession of black-clad mourners. I opened the door to the basement. Usually, opening that door meant being hit with a smell of mildew and darkness. But tonight, as I flipped the switch, the air that drifted up was clean. It smelled of fresh paint and ozone. I descended the stairs first. My hand trailed along the wooden railing. 10 years ago, I had gripped this railing while sobbing, trying to drag my bruised body up the steps. Tonight, my grip was firm. Behind me, I heard the others shuffling down. "Watch your step," I heard my uncle mutter. "What is this about?" When they reached the bottom, they stopped. The basement had been transformed. Gone were the rotting cardboard boxes. Gone were the piles of old furniture. Miguel had cleared it all out. The concrete floor had been scrubbed clean. The walls were painted a stark, clinical white. And overhead, instead of the single, yellow bulb that used to cast long, creepy shadows, I had installed banks of high-intensity LED lights. The room was blindingly bright. It felt like an interrogation room or an operating theater. There were no shadows left. In the center of the room, Miguel had set up a long table with a projector screen at one end. On the table sat a single laptop, connected to a high-end sound system. "What is this?" Sienna asked, looking around with distaste. "It looks like a lab." "It is a clean slate," I said. I walked over to the spot where the metal shelving unit used to be. The bolts were still visible in the wall. I stood there, placing my hand on the cold concrete block. 10 years ago, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the empty space. On Christmas Eve, I stood right here. Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Oh, God, here we go. The persecution complex." "I was 20 years old," I continued, ignoring her. "I had found a letter from Grandpa. And you, Vanessa, came down those stairs. I came down to stop you from ransacking the house, Vanessa shouted, her composure finally cracking. You were having a breakdown. You were hysterical. Mark, do we have to listen to this revisionist history? My father looked uncomfortable. Ari, maybe this isn't the time. You told Dad I threw myself into the shelves, I said, looking at Mark. You told everyone I was unstable. You told them I made it all up. Because you did, Vanessa hissed. She took a step toward me, her finger pointing like a dagger. You were sick, Ariana. You needed attention, and you are doing the exact same thing right now, dragging us all down here to make yourself the center of the universe. I looked at her. I looked at the hate etched into her beautiful face. You said no one would believe me, I said softly. You were right. They didn't. I walked over to the table. Miguel was standing by the laptop. He looked at me, and I nodded. But you forgot one thing. Vanessa, I said. Grandpa Henry didn't trust people. He trusted systems. He trusted logistics. And he trusted his driver. I plugged the HDMI cable into the side of the laptop. 10 years ago, you thought we were alone down here, but we weren't. I hit the spacebar. The screen flared to life. The video was grainy. It was night vision footage from a dashboard camera recorded a decade ago, but the image was unmistakable. It was framed through the small rectangular hopper window high on the wall. The audio, captured by the open intercom line, was crystal clear. Crack. The sound of the slap echoed through the basement, amplified by the speakers. It was loud, brutal. On the screen, everyone saw a younger Vanessa, wearing a red dress, her hair perfect, shove a younger Ariana. They saw me stumble back. They saw the look of pure, unadulterated rage on Vanessa's face. You little snake, the Vanessa on the screen hissed. The voice was identical to the woman standing in the room. My father gasped. It was a wet, choked sound. Then, the violence escalated. The screen showed Vanessa grabbing the broom handle. It showed the swing. It showed the sickening impact as the wood connected with my hip. Thud. Stop, please! The voice of my 20-year-old self screamed through the speakers. It was a sound of pure terror. In the room, my aunt covered her mouth with her hand, tears instantly springing to her eyes. Sienna took a step back, her face draining of all color. She looked from the screen to her mother, her eyes wide with horror. The video continued. We watched me fall. We watched Vanessa stand over me, panting. No one is going to believe you, the digital Vanessa whispered. You are broken, and if you tell your father, I will make sure he sends you to a facility where broken girls go. I let it play for another 10 seconds, just long enough for the silence to stretch, just long enough for the weight of the lie to crush the air out of the room. Then I hit pause. The image on the screen froze on Vanessa's face, twisted in a snarl, looming over my cowering form. The silence in the basement was absolute. It was heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. Mark turned to his wife. His face was gray. He looked like he was going to be sick. You told me, Mark whispered. His voice broke. You told me she fell. You told me she was crazy. You made me send her away. Vanessa was trembling. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. She wasn't looking at Mark. She was staring at the screen, at the proof she thought had been buried in a teenager's memory. It is fake, she shrieked. Her voice was high and thin, bordering on hysterical. It is a deep fake. She made it with her computer company. She is a witch. She doctored it. She lunged toward the table. Turn it off. Turn it off right now. She reached for the laptop, her nails extended, intending to smash it, to kill the messenger. But she never reached it. Miguel stepped out from the shadows. He didn't look like a servant anymore. He looked like a guardian. He stepped between Vanessa and the table, his broad shoulders blocking her path. Don't touch it, Miguel said. His voice was a deep rumble. It was the first time in 30 years that anyone in this family had heard him raise his voice. Vanessa stopped, shocked by his defiance. Move out of my way, you idiot. I am your employer." "No," Miguel said. "You are not. I work for Henry Everett, and I was in the car that night, Mrs. Vanessa." He looked at Mark, then at the rest of the family. "I sat in the driveway," Miguel said, his voice ringing with truth. "I saw her hit the girl. I heard every word through the intercom. I wanted to break the door down, but Henry told me to wait. He told me to keep the tape. He said the truth would need a witness." He looked back at Vanessa with profound disgust. "This is not a fake. This is exactly what you did." Vanessa staggered back as if he had slapped her. She looked around the room for an ally. She looked at Sienna. "Sienna, baby," she pleaded. "You know I wouldn't. You know she's lying." Sienna backed away from her mother, hitting the wall. She was crying, shaking her head. I told everyone she was crazy. I told my friends." She looked at me, her eyes filled with shame. "Oh my God, you were telling the truth." My aunt was sobbing openly now. "We left you," she cried, looking at me. "We let you leave. We thought you were the problem. Oh, Ariana, I am so sorry." I stood there, next to the glowing screen. I felt incredibly calm. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. The anger that had fueled me for 10 years had evaporated, replaced by a cold, clear clarity. I looked at my father. He was weeping, his head in his hands, his body shaking with the realization of his own failure. He had chosen the easy lie over his own daughter, and now the cost was staring him in the face. I walked over to the laptop and closed it. The screen went black. The basement returned to the stark white silence of the LED lights. "I didn't bring you down here to humiliate you," I said. My voice was steady. "And I didn't bring you down here to demand an apology. Apologies are words, and as we have just seen, words are cheap in this family." I looked at Vanessa, who was now standing alone in the center of the room, stripped of her armor, exposed for exactly what she was. "I brought you down here," I said, "because I refuse to be the girl who lied anymore. I am not unstable, I am not broken, and I am not a victim." I signaled to Evelyn. "Now," I said, "we can go upstairs. Now, we can read the will, because now, you all know exactly who is sitting at the head of the table." I turned and walked toward the stairs, leaving them in the bright, unforgiving light of the basement. I didn't look back to see if they were following. I knew they would. They had no choice anymore. The truth had just sucked all the oxygen out of the room, and I was the only one holding the door open. The walk back up the stairs was the longest journey of our collective lives. We moved in a single file, the sound of our footsteps on the wooden treads echoing like the gavel strikes of a judge who had already made up his mind. The air in the house had changed. Before, it was filled with the scent of expensive lilies and the murmur of polite grief. Now, it was heavy with the ozone smell of exposure. We returned to the library. The fire was still crackling, oblivious to the fact that the family gathered around it had just been incinerated. Vanessa walked straight to the fireplace. She turned her back to the room for a moment, gripping the mantle. When she turned around, the mask was back in place. It was cracked. Yes, her eyes were red, her makeup slightly smudged, but she was trying desperately to glue the pieces of her authority back together. She looked at Evelyn Marsh, then at Mark. "That was distressing," Vanessa said. Her voice was brittle, like dry leaves. "And I am sure we will have a long family discussion about forgiveness and context later, but right now, we have legal matters to attend to. The law does not care about 10-year-old videos. Ariana, it cares about documents." She sat down in the wing chair, crossing her legs, trying to reclaim her throne. "Read the will, Evelyn," Vanessa commanded. "Let's establish Mark's ownership so we can finally get some rest. I think we all need this night to end." My father sank onto the sofa. He looked aged, hollowed out by the image of his wife beating his daughter. He didn't look at Vanessa. He looked at the floor. "Yes," Mark whispered. "Just read it." Evelyn Marsh stood by the desk. She looked at me. I nodded. She didn't sit down. She opened her leather briefcase with a sharp snap that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. She pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper, the last will and testament of Henry Everett. "This is the document Henry executed 15 years ago," Evelyn said, holding it up. "It names Mark Everett as the primary beneficiary and executor." Vanessa let out a breath she had been holding. "Exactly. Thank you." "However," Evelyn continued, her voice turning to steel. She set the blue folder aside and reached back into the briefcase. She pulled out a second document. This one was thinner, bound in a stark white cover. "This is the fourth codicil and restatement of trust assets, executed and notarized 2 years ago." Vanessa frowned. "Codicil? I didn't know about any codicil." "You were not required to know," Evelyn said. "Henry was of sound mind and body when he drafted this, and it supersedes all previous instructions regarding the voting stock and the real estate." Evelyn put on her reading glasses. The room went deathly still. "I will skip the preamble," Evelyn said. "Clause 7. The disposition of the controlling interest, I, Henry Everett, hereby transfer and assign all Class A voting shares of the Everett Logistics Group, representing 51% of the total equity and 100% of the voting power, into the Everett Family Trust." She paused. Clause 8. Appointment of trustee, the sole trustee, with absolute discretion over the management, sale, and voting of these shares, shall be my granddaughter, Ariana Elena Cantu. The silence that followed was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a vacuum, as if all the air had been sucked into space. "What?" Vanessa whispered. The word came out as a squeak. Clause 9, Evelyn continued, relentless. "I further devise and bequeath the real property known as the Maple Ridge Estate, including the main house, the guest cottage, and all outbuildings, to the Everett Family Trust, under the sole administration of the trustee, Ariana Cantu." Evelyn took off her glasses and looked up. "In plain English," she said, "Ariana controls the company. Ariana owns this house. Mark, you retain your Class B shares, which entitle you to dividends and income, but you have no vote on the board, and you have no legal claim to this property." "That is a lie!" Vanessa screamed. She jumped up, knocking over her wine glass. Red wine soaked into the Persian rug like blood. "That is a fraud. You forged it. Henry would never do that. He loved Mark." "He did love Mark," I said. I stepped forward, taking my place at the head of the heavy oak table. I placed my hands on the wood. It felt cool and solid. "He loved him enough to make sure he would be rich for the rest of his life, but he didn't trust him to protect the legacy from you." "I am calling the police," Vanessa shouted, fumbling for her phone. "I am calling my lawyer. This is undue influence. You manipulated a dying man." "Sit down, Vanessa," Evelyn said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of 50 years of courtroom experience. "Before you embarrass yourself further, you should look at page 4. Evelyn slid the document across the table toward my father. "Mark," she said, "do you recognize this signature?" My father looked up, his eyes unfocused. He reached out with a trembling hand and took the paper. He stared at the bottom of the page. There, in blue ink, was his own signature. Mark Everett. Mark stammered. "I don't understand. I never signed this." "You did," Evelyn said. "October 14th, 2 years ago. We met at the bank for the quarterly review. I handed you a stack of documents regarding the restructuring of the family assets to minimize estate taxes. You were in a hurry. You said you had a tea time with the senator. You asked me, 'Is this just the standard tax stuff, Evelyn?' And I told you. It updates the structure of the trust." Mark's face went pale. The memory was clearly coming back to him. The rush, the casual arrogance of a man who thought the world was built to serve him. The blind trust that the papers were just formalities. "I didn't read it," Mark whispered. "I just signed it." "You acknowledged receipt," Evelyn corrected, "and you acknowledged that you had been given the opportunity to review it. Legally, Mark, you signed away your voting rights. You agreed to this arrangement." Vanessa stared at her husband with a look of pure venom. You idiot, she breathed. You stupid, lazy idiot. You gave it all away? I didn't know, Mark cried, looking at me. Ariana, I swear, I didn't know. He never told me. He tried to tell you, I said quietly. For years, he tried to tell you that the company was drifting. He tried to tell you that Vanessa was isolating the staff. You didn't listen. Just like you didn't look at my arm when I showed you the bruises. You just wanted everything to be smooth. Well, Dad, this is the result of smooth. You signed your own abdication because you couldn't be bothered to read the fine print. Mark put his head in his hands. He looked broken. Vanessa, however, was not broken. She was cornered, and cornered animals attack. Fine, she spat. So you have the paper. Congratulations. But you can't run this company. Ariana, you are a 29-year-old nobody. You run some little security startup in Chicago. The board will eat you alive. The shareholders will revolt. You know nothing about logistics. You know nothing about the supply chain. I smiled. It was the moment I had been waiting for. That is funny, I said, because according to the quarterly reports I read, the board is actually quite happy with the new efficiency protocols in the Midwest distribution centers. In fact, they just renewed a 5-year contract with their security and automation vendor. I reached into my bag and pulled out a different folder. This one was sleek, black, with a silver logo on the front. Glassline Systems. I tossed it onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right in front of Vanessa. Open it, I said. Vanessa stared at the folder. She opened it slowly. Glassline Systems, I said. Founded by Ariana Cantu, current valuation, $80 million. We provide the security architecture for 300 major facilities in the Midwest, including for the last 12 months, every single warehouse owned by Everett Logistics. Vanessa looked up, her mouth gaping. You are the vendor? I am the CEO, I said. And for the last year, I have been watching my own trucks. I have been analyzing the data. I know exactly where the money is bleeding. I know about the kickbacks the VP of Operations is taking from the fuel suppliers. I know about the consulting fees you have been billing to the company for your charity events. Vanessa, I have the receipts. I have the logs. I have everything. I leaned forward, resting my weight on my palms. I don't just know logistics. Vanessa, I am the system. You have been living in a house wired by the girl you threw out. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was the silence of total defeat. My aunt and uncle were looking at me with wide, awestruck eyes. They weren't looking at a niece anymore. They were looking at the new patriarch, or rather, matriarch. So, I said, straightening up, here is how this is going to work. I looked at Mark. Dad, I am not kicking you out. You can stay in the main house. You will keep your dividends. You will never have to worry about money. But you are retired, effective immediately. You will step down as president, and the board will appoint my nominee. You can play golf. You can rest. But you are done making decisions. I turned to Vanessa. I said, you have a choice. You can contest this. You can drag this into court. If you do, I will release the basement video to the press. I will release the financial audits showing your embezzlement of company funds for your parties. I will ruin you, Vanessa. Not just financially, but socially. You will be a pariah in every club in Ohio. Vanessa paled. Her social standing was the only currency she valued as much as money. Or, I continued, you can accept the new terms. You will vacate the master suite. You and Dad can move into the guest cottage, the one you wanted to bulldoze for Sienna's pool house. It is cozy. I grew up there. It builds character. Sienna let out a sob. Mom, we are moving to the cottage? Vanessa didn't answer. She just stared at me, realizing for the first time that the game was truly over. And one more thing, I said, addressing the room at large. From this day forward, the basement is no longer a storage room. It is going to be the headquarters for the new charitable arm of the Everett Trust. It will be a center for advocacy for victims of domestic abuse who have been silenced by their families. We are going to fund legal aid. We are going to fund shelters. And we are going to name it the Elena Cantu Center. I looked at my father. "We are going to stop hiding our ugly history," I said. "We are going to use it to help people who didn't have a Miguel in the driveway." My aunt stood up slowly. She walked over to me. I stiffened, expecting a rebuke, expecting her to defend Mark. Instead, she reached out and took my hand. "Your mother would be so proud," she whispered. "And Henry knew exactly what he was doing." She turned to Vanessa. "I think you should go pack. Vanessa, the cottage is small. You won't have room for all those dresses." It was the final nail. The family had flipped. They had seen the strength, and like iron filings to a magnet, they had aligned with the new pole of power. Vanessa stood up. She tried to muster some dignity, smoothing her skirt, lifting her chin, but her eyes were dead. "You are a cruel girl," she said. "I am a just woman," I replied. "There is a difference." She walked out of the room. Sienna followed her, looking back at me once with a mixture of fear and admiration. Mark sat on the sofa for a long time, staring at the signature that had cost him his crown. "I am sorry, Ari," he whispered to the empty air. "I know, Dad," I said. "But sorry doesn't run a company." I walked over to the window and looked out at the dark grounds. The snow was falling again, covering the tracks of the leaving guests, covering the old world. I could see the light in the garage. Miguel was still there, waiting. I pulled my phone out and sent a single text to my COO in Chicago. "Acquisition complete. Prepare the press release." I turned back to the room. Evelyn was closing her briefcase, a small, satisfied smile on her lips. "Well done, trustee," she said. "We are just getting started," I said. "The basement is open. Now let's see what else we can clean up." I looked at the portrait of Grandpa Henry hanging over the fireplace. He looked stern, unsmiling, but in the flickering firelight, I could have sworn he winked. I had come home not to burn the house down, but to turn on the lights, and for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't afraid of what they would reveal. The shadows were gone. I was the one holding the switch. The days following the reading of the will were defined not by silence, but by the noise of construction. I did not waste a single hour. The ink on the legal documents was barely dry before I had a crew of contractors pulling up the driveway. My first executive order as the head of the Everett family was not to liquidate stocks or fire board members. It was to tear down a wall. I stood in the basement, wearing a pair of old jeans and a respirator mask, watching as a sledgehammer smashed through the concrete surrounding that tiny, hateful hopper window. The dust filled the air, thick and white. With every swing of the hammer, the darkness that had lived in this room for 20 years seemed to retreat a little further. I didn't want a dungeon anymore. I wanted a solarium. By the end of the week, the basement was unrecognizable. We installed a row of reinforced glass windows that stretched from the ceiling to the ground, letting the winter sun flood the space. We painted the walls a color called daylight white. We ripped out the old furnace that used to groan like a dying beast and replaced it with a silent geothermal system. And of course, I installed Glassline. Sensors were embedded in the door frames. Cameras with 300-degree views were mounted in the corners, not to spy, but to document. I wanted this room to be the safest place in Ohio. On Saturday, when the paint was finally dry, I hosted my first lunch. It wasn't a formal affair. There were no crystal goblets or silver platters. I ordered sandwiches from the deli in town, roast beef, turkey, and extra pickles, and set up a folding table right in the middle of the room, exactly where I used to hide behind the boxes. My guests were not the local politicians or the country club elite. My guests were the staff. There was Mrs. Higgins, the cook who had sneaked me extra cookies when Vanessa put me on a diet at age 12. There was the gardener, who used to let me help him mulch the roses when I was lonely. And at the head of the table, sitting in the best chair, was Miguel. We ate sandwiches and drank iced tea. For the first hour, everyone was stiff, terrified of saying the wrong thing to the new boss. But then, Miguel started talking. He told a story about Grandpa Henry from 30 years ago. He talked about a blizzard in 1995, how Henry had gotten out of the car in his expensive suit to help push a stranger's sedan out of a ditch. He ruined his shoes, Miguel laughed, wiping mustard from his lip. Italian leather, ruined, and when I asked him why he did it, he just said, "Miguel, if we have the horsepower, we have the duty." The room warmed up. Stories began to flow. We weren't mourning the tyrant of industry. We were remembering the man who tried, however imperfectly, to hold things together. Toward the end of the meal, the conversation turned serious. Miguel looked at the new cameras mounted on the wall. "He always said it," Miguel murmured. "Don't ever turn off the camera just because someone powerful asks." That is what he told me the day he hired me. I put down my sandwich. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. "Miguel," I said, "I am making some changes to the staff structure." The room went quiet. Miguel looked down, expecting a severance package. He was 65, after all. He probably thought I was putting him out to pasture. "I don't need a driver anymore," I said. "I like to drive myself. It helps me think." Miguel nodded slowly. "I understand, Miss Ariana. I can clear out my locker by Monday." "However," I continued, sliding the envelope across the table, "Glassline Systems is launching a new division. We are calling it Protective Logistics. We need someone to head up the training program for our witness protection monitoring teams. We need someone who understands discretion, someone who understands that the job isn't just about watching, it is about waiting." Miguel opened the envelope. Inside was an offer letter. The salary was 3 times what he made driving the car. "The job is in Chicago," I said, "but we will cover your relocation, and you will have a corner office." Miguel stared at the paper. His hands were shaking slightly. "I don't know anything about computers, Miss Ariana," he said softly. "I have plenty of people who know computers," I replied. "I need someone who knows character. I need someone who knows when to lock the doors and when to open them. Will you help me?" He looked up at me. His eyes were wet. "If Henry were here," he whispered, "he would be nodding." "Then it is settled," I said. "Welcome to the board. Miguel?" Later that afternoon, the staff went back to their duties, buzzing with the news. I stayed in the basement, testing the Wi-Fi signal. I heard the door open upstairs. The footsteps that descended were heavy, hesitant. It was my father. Mark stood at the bottom of the stairs, blinking in the brightness of the new room. He looked around, disoriented. He was looking for the shadows where he used to hide his guilt, but there were none left. "It is bright," he said. "That is the point," I answered without looking up from my tablet. He walked over and stood near the window, looking out at the snow. He looked older than he had a week ago. The resignation had taken something vital out of him, but maybe that was a good thing. The arrogance was gone too. "Vanessa is packing," he said. "She is taking the china." "Let her take it," I said. "I prefer white plates anyway." He turned to me. He put his hands in his pockets, looking like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. "Ari," he started, I want to say that I am sorry. For everything. For not believing you. For letting her push you out." I looked at him. I waited for the emotion to swell in my chest, for the urge to run into his arms and cry "Daddy," but it didn't come. That part of me had callous over it now. "Thank you for the apology, Dad," I said professionally. "I accept it." He took a step forward, as if to hug me. I didn't step back, but I didn't open my arms. I gestured to the chair opposite me. "Sit down, Mark," I said. "We need to go over the restructuring of your assets." He stopped. The use of his first name hit him like a physical barrier. He realized then that he wasn't talking to his little girl. He was talking to the trustee. He sat down. I spent the next hour explaining the new structure of the company. I explained how his dividends would be paid. I explained the limits of his authority. I treated him with the exact same courteous distance I would treat a branch manager who had failed to meet his quotas but was being kept on for sentimental reasons. When we were done, he stood up. He looked sad, but he also looked relieved. The burden of leadership, which he had never really wanted, was gone. "You are good at this," he said, tapping the spreadsheet. "You are just like him." "I know," I said. "That is why he left it to me." He walked to the stairs. He paused halfway up. "Will you come to dinner at the cottage sometime?" he asked. "Once we are settled?" "Maybe," I said. "Let me check my calendar." It wasn't a no, but it wasn't a yes. It was a boundary. And for the first time in our relationship, I was the one drawing it. Vanessa and Sienna left 2 days later. They didn't come to say goodbye. I watched from the living room window as they loaded their suitcases into a moving van. They were moving to a 4-bedroom house in a respectable suburb about 40 minutes away. It was a nice house. It was a comfortable life, but it wasn't the estate. And for Vanessa, that was a fate worse than death. Sienna looked up at the window before she got into the car. I saw her hesitate. I think part of her wanted to stay. Part of her realized that she had backed the wrong horse, but she had made her choice years ago when she decided to participate in the lie. I had a rule for my new life, and I intended to stick to it. Anyone who chooses to live by blinding the truth cannot live in a house rebuilt by light. The car drove away. The gates closed behind them. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. 6 months later, I launched the Basement Sessions. It started small. I used the network I had built through Glassline to reach out to other survivors of domestic gaslighting, people who had been told they were crazy, people who had been hidden away by wealthy families to protect a reputation. Once a year, in the summer, I opened the estate. We didn't meet in the ballroom. We met in the basement. We set up chairs in a circle. There were no press, no cameras, no recordings. Just 50 people sitting in a sunlit room, telling the stories they had been forced to swallow. It became a place of radical validation. I remember the first session. A young man from a political family stood up. He told us how his father had beaten him for being gay, then paid off the doctors to say it was a sports injury. He shook as he spoke. When he was done, he looked at me and asked, "How do you make the anger go away?" I looked at the spot on the wall where the broom had hit me. "You don't," I told him. "You don't make it go away. You convert it. You turn it into fuel. Anger is just energy. If you keep it inside, it burns you down. If you let it out correctly, it lights up the whole city." I hung a picture on the wall of the staircase leading down to the basement. It was a small frame. Inside were 2 photos side by side. The first was a still from the security footage. A blurry, 20-year-old girl cowering on the floor. The second was a photo of me taken the day I signed the papers, standing tall, wearing my trench coat, looking straight at the lens. I walked past it every time I went down there. I didn't look away. The past doesn't vanish just because you win. It stays with you. The trick is to take it out of the dark and put it in a frame where you can see it. You have to acknowledge the girl on the floor to become the woman in the coat. 1 year later, I stood on the top floor of the Glassline headquarters in Chicago. It was night. The city was a grid of amber and steel. Just like the night I received Vanessa's text. But I wasn't cold anymore. I walked over to the wall of monitors, my central command. Screen 1 showed the server loads. Screen 2 showed the stock ticker for Everett Logistics, up 15% since the leadership change. Screen 3 showed a live feed from Maple Ridge. The basement was full, but it wasn't full of victims tonight. It was full of teenagers. We had turned the space into a creative after-school center for kids from the town who didn't have anywhere else to go. I watched a girl with pink hair strumming a guitar in the corner where I used to cry. I watched 2 boys debating a comic book at the table where Miguel and I had eaten sandwiches. I watched them laugh. There was no sound on the feed, but I could feel the vibration of it. The basement wasn't a wound anymore. It was a womb. It was birthing something new. I smiled, my reflection ghostly in the glass. I had done it. I had taken the ugliest thing in my life and turned it into a sanctuary. I turned away from the window, looking out into the darkness of the room where you are sitting right now. Yes, you. I have a question for you. Life is going to offer you a moment, maybe tomorrow, maybe 10 years from now, where you hold the memory card. You will be the only one who knows what really happened. You will have the power to expose a lie that has kept everyone comfortable. When that moment comes, you have two choices. Option A. You delete the footage, you swallow the secret, you keep the peace, you keep your seat at the dinner table, and you let the darkness stay exactly where it is because it is safer that way. Option B. You turn on the lights, you walk into the room that scares you the most, you plug in the drive, and you force everyone to watch the truth. You might lose your family, you might lose your inheritance, but you will build a house where the walls are made of glass, and nothing can ever hurt you in the dark again. So tell me, if you were the one holding the remote control, would you press play? Thank you so much for listening to my story. I want to know where in the world you are hearing this from. Are you in a high-rise in Chicago, a small town like Maple Ridge, or somewhere entirely different? Let me know in the comments below. And tell me, if it were your story, would you choose option A or option B? Please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories. Hit that like button to support the truth, and press the like button so this story can reach everyone who needs to hear it. Do you dare step into the basement with me one more time?